Emery's smile told me everything the second she opened the door, too bright, too polished, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. She stood there in her perfectly pressed apron, not a single strand of hair out of place, like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread about the ideal Thanksgiving hostess. "Geraldine," she said, my name coming out like something unpleasant. "Not happy Thanksgiving, Mom. Not even come in. Just a flat acknowledgement, the way you'd greet a door-to-door salesperson you didn't want to engage with." I tightened my grip on the small bouquet of supermarket flowers and immediately felt stupid for bringing them. $23.47. That's what I had left in my grocery budget after buying those flowers. Still, I'd wanted to bring something, anything, to prove I belonged at their table, even if lately it felt like I didn't. "These are for the table," I said, holding them out. Emery's eyes flicked down. I caught the tiniest curl of her lip before she smoothed her expression back into politeness. "How thoughtful," she said, taking the bouquet by the very tips of her fingers, like the stems might contaminate her manicured hands. "Quincy's in the kitchen." The house smelled like roasted turkey and sage. Warm, familiar, almost comforting. But underneath that warmth was something colder, something I couldn't name. As I followed her through the foyer, I noticed how everything gleamed. The hardwood floors, the granite countertops visible through the kitchen doorway, even the brass cabinet handles. This was my son's house, my son's life, so far from the modest apartment where I raised him after his father died. Quincy stood at the kitchen island carving the turkey with surgical precision. At 44, he'd grown into the kind of successful man people admired. His law practice was thriving, his home was beautiful, his wife was young and attractive, everything a mother was supposed to feel proud of. So why did I feel like I'd walked into a stranger's home? "Hi, honey," I said, stepping in for a hug. He stiffened for a heartbeat, then let it happen, patting my back with the same energy you'd give an acquaintance at a work function. "Hey, Mom, good to see you." The kitchen sounded like a perfect holiday scene, pots bubbling, the oven timer chirping softly, the gentle clink of good china being arranged on the dining room table. Yet somehow, beneath all of it, there was silence, the kind that lives between people who no longer have anything real to say. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, searching for something useful to do, something to earn my place. Emery reappeared as if she'd been waiting for the question, my flowers already vanished somewhere out of sight. "Oh no, everything's under control," she said smoothly. "Why don't you just sit?" She gestured to a bar stool at the far end of the kitchen island, the kind of seat you offer someone you want nearby only in the most technical sense. Not close enough to participate, but not so excluded that it looks rude. I perched there awkwardly, hands folded in my lap, watching my son and his wife move around each other with practiced, choreographed ease. They'd been married for 5 years, and I still felt like I was peering through a window at their life. From the beginning, Emery had made it clear she didn't need me around, always wrapped in a careful layer of politeness. "Oh, Geraldine, you don't have to come to Quincy's birthday dinner. It's going to be very small. The holidays are hectic. Maybe you should relax at home this year." But I was here now, and I told myself I'd make the best of it. "The turkey smells wonderful," I offered, forcing cheer into my voice. "It should," Emery replied, still focused on the potatoes she was mashing. "It cost $68. Organic. Free range." There was something sharp in how she said it, like the price was the point, like she wanted me to feel the distance between their world and mine. I thought about the $7 chicken I'd bought for myself, the one I'd planned to eat alone in my tiny efficiency apartment when I assumed I wouldn't be invited at all. "That's nice," I said quietly. Quincy glanced up from the turkey. "How's the apartment, Mom? Everything working okay?" "Oh, fine," I lied automatically. "The heat's been a little spotty, but the landlord says he'll take a look next week." I didn't tell him I'd been sleeping under 3 blankets because I couldn't afford to run the heat much, or that spotty actually meant none, and my landlord hadn't returned a single call in 2 weeks. "Maybe you should look for somewhere else," Emery said lightly, like she was making conversation. "Somewhere more suitable for someone your age." The way she said, "your age," made me feel ancient. I was 69, not 99. I still worked part-time at the library. I still lived on my own. I still had my health and my mind. But in Emery's voice, there was that soft implication that I was already 1 foot in the grave. "I like my apartment," I said, even though that wasn't fully true. What I liked was what it meant, that I wasn't anyone's burden, that I had my independence. "Of course you do," she replied, flashing that bright, practiced smile again. Then the doorbell rang, and for the first time since I arrived, Emery's face warmed with something real. "That must be my parents," she said, and she practically floated to the front door. I had forgotten her parents were coming, Charles and Patricia Morrison, the kind of people who owned a chain of restaurants and spent their winters in Florida. They swept inside with expensive coats and loud voices, filling the house with the effortless confidence of people who never questioned whether they belonged anywhere. "Emery, darling," Patricia said, air-kissing her daughter while somehow managing to embrace Quincy in the same motion. "The house looks absolutely divine." Charles was already admiring the renovated kitchen, asking Quincy about the contractor and the cost of the marble countertops. These were people who fit this house. They fit this life. They looked like they'd always belonged inside spaces like this. Meanwhile, I stayed perched on my bar stool, watching the real family gather, feeling myself fade into the background with every passing second. "Mom," Quincy said at last, like he'd just remembered I existed. "You remember Emery's parents?" "Of course," I said, forcing a polite smile as I stood. "It's nice to see you again." Patricia turned to me with the kind of smile people reserve for an elderly relative they see once a year and immediately forget. "Geraldine, wasn't it? How lovely. You look... well?" That pause before well said everything. I was wearing my best dress, the navy one I'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago for church. But next to Patricia's designer outfit, I suddenly felt like I'd shown up wearing a costume. I caught the expensive floral perfume she wore, and my stomach tightened as I became aware of my own scent. Soap, and underneath it, the faint trace of onions from the chopping I'd done that morning for my neighbor to earn a few extra dollars. Then dinner was announced, and we moved into the dining room. The table was set for 6, gleaming china, crystal glasses that caught the chandelier light, polished silverware arranged with precision. I was seated at the far end, between Charles and an empty chair that would have been for Emery's sister if she hadn't canceled last minute. Conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Vacation plans, stock portfolios, restaurants they'd tried, wines they'd discovered. I tried to join in when I could, but my stories about library patrons and thrift store finds landed like dull pebbles, creating tiny, awkward silences that Emery quickly smoothed over by steering the talk somewhere else. I was reaching for the salt when it happened. "Oh my God," Emery said suddenly, her voice sharp with disgust. "What is that smell?" The table went still. Heads turned, following her horrified stare straight to me. "Emery," Quincy said quietly, warning in his tone, but she was already standing, pressing a hand to her nose like she was performing for an audience. "It's onions. You smell like onions, Geraldine. It's making me sick." Heat rushed into my face so fast I thought I might faint. Yes, I'd chopped onions for Mrs. Rodriguez next door that morning. Her hands were ruined by arthritis and she couldn't manage it herself. She'd paid me $10. $10 I truly needed. I'd scrubbed my hands after, used lemon and soap, but the smell must have clung to my clothes anyway. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't realize." "How can you not realize?" Emery's voice rose higher, sharper. "It's overwhelming. Patricia, aren't you just dying from that smell?" Patricia shifted uncomfortably, caught between backing her daughter and not wanting to look openly cruel toward an older woman at the table. "I think I should go," I said, starting to push back my chair. "Yes," Emery replied immediately, too quickly, too relieved. "Yes, that would be best. This is a special dinner and, well, you understand." I didn't look at her. I looked at my son. I waited for him to say something, anything, to tell his wife she was being cruel, to tell her to sit down and stop humiliating me. But Quincy stared at his plate, jaw clenched, silent. "Quincy," I said softly. He finally lifted his eyes to mine, and what I saw there hurt more than Emery's words ever could. Embarrassment. He was embarrassed by me. "Maybe it would be better, Mom," he said quietly. "Just for tonight." The sentence hit me like a physical blow. My own son, the boy I raised alone after his father died, the one I worked 3 jobs to support, the one I pushed through law school, was asking me to leave because I smelled like the work I had done to survive. I stood up on shaking legs, my napkin slipping from my lap and falling to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. No one even looked down. "I'll get my coat," I managed. In the foyer, I fumbled with my old wool coat, hands trembling so badly I could barely handle the buttons. From the dining room doorway, I heard Emery again, bright, cheerful, effortless, like nothing had happened. "I'm so sorry about that," she said lightly. "She's been having some difficulties lately. Poor thing. She doesn't really understand social cues anymore. Poor thing." Like I was helpless. Like I was confused. Like I was some fragile old woman who didn't know what was happening, when the truth was I understood every single word, every insult, every dismissal, and the worst part wasn't Emery. It was that my son stayed quiet while she said it. I slipped out on my own without saying goodbye. The cold November air hit my face like a slap, and I welcomed it. Its honesty felt better than the poisonous warmth inside that house. In my car, I just sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, trying to breathe normally. $50.37. That was all I had until my Social Security check arrived next week. Enough for gas and maybe a small meal somewhere, but not enough for anything that resembled comfort. I backed out of the driveway and drove toward downtown without a plan, the radio playing soft jazz while city lights smeared into bright streaks through my tears. For the first time in my life, I had nowhere to go on Thanksgiving. The train station came into view, old brick, glowing against the darkening sky. Without consciously deciding, I turned into the parking lot and sat there watching people hurry in and out with luggage and purpose. And a thought came to me, quiet but startling. Maybe it's time to go somewhere. Anywhere. Leave this city where my son lived his perfect life with no space for his embarrassing mother. I had $50 and a credit card with maybe $200 left on it. Enough for a train ticket. Enough to vanish. And for the first time all day, that idea didn't make me sad. It made me feel almost free. At night, the station had a different rhythm than it did in the morning. Daytime belonged to commuters, fast footsteps, clipped conversations, eyes fixed on time. Evening felt slower, heavier. Couples hugged goodbye like it physically hurt to let go. People lingered at platforms. Travelers sat on benches holding paper cups and private thoughts. I stayed there nearly an hour, mostly watching. The departure board flickered above the waiting area. Chicago, New York, even a train heading west to Denver. All those names, all those possibilities, all those places where nobody knew Geraldine Parker as the mother her successful son didn't want seen. The $50 bill felt thin in my fingers. I counted it 3 times, like repetition might change the result. But math had never been magical. $50.37. Not enough for much, but enough to disappear. That's when I noticed him. He sat alone on a bench near the far wall, an older man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a plain dark coat that looked like it had been through a few hard winters. What drew my attention wasn't his clothes or his posture, but the way people responded to him. A young couple had been sitting beside him until he tried to ask them something, moving his hands in small, careful gestures. They stood up immediately and moved away, whispering with the kind of disgust people don't even bother to hide. A station employee approached him twice, speaking loudly and slowly, as if volume could bulldoze through any barrier. Each time the man tried to respond with hand movements, but the employee's face tightened with impatience, and he finally walked away, shaking his head. Then a group of teenagers noticed the man signing to himself, like he was talking through thoughts only he could hear. They started copying him, exaggerating the motions like a parody, laughing too loudly. Other passengers either joined the amusement or stared with that uncomfortable fascination people wear when they're glad the humiliation isn't happening to them. The man seemed to fold inward, his hands dropped to his lap, his shoulders curved forward. Even from across the waiting area, I could see the resignation settle into his body like a familiar coat. He was used to this, used to being treated like entertainment or a problem or an inconvenience someone had to tolerate. Something hot and familiar rose in my chest, an old anger, an old protectiveness. It reminded me of being 25, newly widowed, watching neighborhood kids torment Mrs. Patterson, the deaf woman who lived next door. They used to shout at her, then laugh when she couldn't understand. They mocked the way her voice sounded when she tried to respond. Back then, I'd been the one who stepped in. I'd asked Mrs. Patterson to teach me sign language so I could help her with landlords, doctors, store clerks, anyone who didn't have the patience to read a note or slow down and try. We spent hours together over 2 years, and those lessons became a small light during the darkest stretch of my life, when I was exhausted, broke, and raising Quincy alone. I hadn't used sign language in decades, but watching this man being humiliated made it rush back like muscle memory. Before I could overthink it, I stood and walked across the waiting area. The teenagers scattered the moment they realized someone was coming toward them, probably sensing they were about to get scolded by somebody's grandmother. The man looked up when I sat beside him. His eyes were tired, guarded, like he expected the next person to treat him the same way. I lifted my hands slowly and signed, "Are you okay?" The change in his expression was immediate, almost shocking. His eyes widened, then softened, filling with something that looked like relief and gratitude tangled together. He sat up straighter, no longer trying to shrink into the bench. "You know sign," he signed back, his movements quick and smooth, far more confident than my rusty hands. "A little," I signed, stumbling through the shapes. "People were being unkind. I'm sorry." He brushed my apology away with a gentle, practiced gesture. "I'm used to it," he signed, "but thank you for noticing. Not many people do." We sat in a quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt safe. And I found myself studying his face, as if there was something there I needed to understand. There was something dignified about him, something that didn't match the worn coat or the way others had treated him. His hands were clean, well cared for. Now that he wasn't being mocked, his posture was straight, certain even. He carried himself like someone who was accustomed to respect, someone who had once been listened to. "Are you traveling?" I asked. "Supposed to be," he signed, then hesitated. "But I think I lost my wallet, my ticket, my ID, everything." My heart sank for him. Being stranded was stressful even when you could easily ask for help, but for someone who couldn't hear, someone who relied on sign language, getting assistance here would be close to impossible. "Did you check lost and found?" I signed. He nodded, discouraged. The clerk couldn't understand what I was asking for. He kept talking louder, like that helps. His hands added a small, bitter flourish. Amazing how many people think deafness is actually a volume problem. I couldn't help smiling, and the faint surprise in his eyes told me he didn't expect anyone to find humor, even dark humor, in his situation. "Where were you trying to go?" I asked. "Baltimore. I have family there." A pause, a flicker of uncertainty. "I'm supposed to be at work tomorrow, but I guess that's not happening." "What kind of work?" His hands hesitated, then signed slowly. "Medical field." But the way he said it, light, dismissive, told me he wasn't giving the whole truth. I didn't press. We all carried things we weren't ready to tell strangers. I glanced at the departure board. A train to Baltimore was leaving in 45 minutes. A one-way ticket cost $43. I had exactly $50.37. Before I could talk myself out of it, I signed, "What if I bought your ticket?" He froze, his hands stilled in midair. "I can't ask you for that." "You didn't ask," I signed back. "I'm offering. You don't even know me." I thought about that. I knew he was stranded. I knew people had treated him horribly and he hadn't responded with anger. I knew that he carried himself with quiet strength and dignity even after humiliation. That was enough. "Why would you help a stranger?" he asked. The question struck deeper than I expected. Why was I willing to give almost everything I had to someone I'd just met? Maybe because I'd been shown so little kindness that day. Maybe because helping Mrs. Patterson all those years ago was one of the few times I'd felt truly useful. Maybe because doing something good felt better than sitting alone, drowning in hurt. "Because you need help and I can give it," I signed. It's that simple. He studied me carefully, as if trying to see inside my thoughts. His eyes glistened, though he blinked the tears back. "That would mean everything to me," he signed. "But I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," I replied, standing. My heart pounded as I walked to the ticket counter. $43 would leave me with $7.37, not even enough to get myself anywhere useful, barely enough to eat. But somehow buying that ticket felt like the first right thing I'd done all day. The tired ticket agent processed the purchase with barely a glance. "Baltimore, platform 3 in 40 minutes, she said. When I returned, he was already standing as if ready to take on the world again. I handed him the ticket. He looked at it as if afraid it might vanish. "Thank you," he signed. But those 2 words didn't come close to capturing the emotion on his face. "Travel safely," I signed back. He nodded, reached into his coat, and pulled out a small white business card. No name, no logo, just a single phone number. He placed it gently into my hand. "If you ever need anything," he signed, "call this number. Tell them Samuel sent you." "Samuel," I repeated aloud, trying to sign it. He showed me, spelling it out, then making a unique, fluid gesture as if sketching something in the air. "What will I tell them you did for me?" I asked. His answer came slowly, carefully. "Tell them you showed kindness to a stranger when no one else would. They'll understand." And there was something in the way he signed it, something weighted with meaning, with intention, that made the hairs on my arms rise. This wasn't just a thank you. It felt like a connection to something larger, something hidden. Before I could ask more, the announcement came. "Final boarding for the train to Baltimore." "That's my train," he signed. "Go," I urged him. "Don't miss it." He picked up a small canvas bag I hadn't noticed before. As he started toward the platform, he turned one last time. With careful, deliberate hands, he signed, "You will have a good life." It didn't feel like hope. It didn't feel like a polite goodbye. It felt like a promise. And then he melted into the crowd. I sat back down, the business card still warm in my palm. Around me, the station kept moving, people coming, people going, trains arriving and departing. But something inside me had shifted. The emptiness I'd felt after leaving my son's house was gone. Not replaced by happiness, exactly, but by purpose. Warmth. Meaning. $7.37 left. I counted it and let out a small laugh. I'd given most of what I had to a man I didn't know, yet I felt richer than I had all day. I tucked Samuel's card into my wallet next to my driver's license. Plain, simple, mysterious. What could a deaf man with no wallet, no ID, and only a phone number possibly do to help me? I didn't know. But something in the way he'd signed that final promise made me believe there was more to Samuel than met the eye. I looked back at the departure board. The Baltimore train was probably pulling away now, carrying him toward whatever waited for him, and carrying away the first piece of my heartbreak with it. I hoped whoever was waiting for him in Baltimore would understand what it had taken for him to get there. The small mercies, the quiet kindness of strangers, the fact that someone had chosen to see him as human when everyone else treated him like a problem. A new announcement echoed through the station. Passengers were being called to board the delayed train to Chicago. For a moment, I considered it. $7 wouldn't buy me a ticket, but maybe I could speak to the conductor. Maybe I could explain. Maybe there was still a way to start over somewhere new. But as I sat there in the station's warmth, watching other people gather their bags and step into their next chapters, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like running away. I felt like someone who still had value, something real to offer, whether my own family recognized it or not. I stood, pulled my coat close, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the November air was still sharp, but it no longer felt like a slap. It felt like a beginning. The business card pressed against my fingers through my wallet as I crossed the parking lot to my car. Samuel had vanished into the night, but he'd left me something unexpected. Not just a phone number. A reminder that there were still people in the world who understood what genuine kindness looked like, who recognized it when it appeared. And somehow, that felt like the first page of something important. I made it exactly 3 blocks from the train station before they found me. 6 men in identical black suits appeared from the shadows like something out of a movie, moving with the kind of silent coordination that spoke of training, military, law enforcement, something serious. They formed a loose perimeter around my old Honda as I sat at a red light, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. My first instinct was panic. In my neighborhood, well-dressed men approaching your car at night usually meant trouble, the expensive kind. I fumbled toward the door lock, but the man closest to my window raised his hands, palms out, in a calm, non-threatening gesture. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, gray at the temples, with the kind of steady face you'd expect on someone who carried responsibility for a living. When he spoke, his tone was respectful but urgent. "Mrs. Parker, I'm Agent Morrison with hospital security. There's someone who needs to show you some gratitude." Hospital security? I lowered my window just a few inches, my heart hammering anyway. I don't understand." "The gentleman you helped at the train station tonight," he said. "Dr. Samuel Chen. He asked us to find you." Dr. Chen. Samuel was a doctor. That explained the dignity I'd felt beneath his simple clothing, but it did not explain why hospital security was tracking me down like I was a fugitive. "Is he okay?" I asked quickly. "Did something happen to his train?" Agent Morrison exchanged a glance with one of the other men, then looked back at me. "Mrs. Parker, would you be willing to come with us? Dr. Chen would very much like to speak with you, and there are some things he needs to explain, in person." Every instinct I'd earned in 69 years told me to drive away. Normal people didn't get surrounded by teams of security agents at night. Normal good deeds didn't lead to secret invitations and black suits and urgent voices. But nothing about this evening had been normal, starting with my own son letting his wife humiliate me at Thanksgiving like I was disposable. And something in Agent Morrison's manner, measured, controlled, almost protective, told me that whatever this was, it wasn't meant to harm me. At least, I thought, not physically. "Where is Dr. Chen?" I asked. "St. Mary's Hospital," he answered. "About 15 minutes from here." I thought of my empty apartment, the $7.37 in my purse, the humiliation still burning in my chest, like a bruise you couldn't stop touching. What did I have to lose? "I'll follow you," I said. The convoy of black SUVs escorting my aging Honda through the city felt ridiculous, and yet, in a strange way, oddly comforting. Whatever Samuel had gotten himself into, it was serious enough to warrant this level of protection. When we pulled into the hospital's private entrance, I began to understand something I hadn't wanted to admit. The man I'd helped wasn't just any doctor. St. Mary's was the kind of hospital wealthy people used when they wanted discretion. The wing we entered looked less like a medical facility and more like a luxury hotel. Marble floors, quiet lighting, original artwork on the walls. Everything smelled like expensive disinfectant and privilege. Agent Morrison guided me through corridors that were too quiet, too clean, too removed from the world I lived in. Then, as we walked, he slowed slightly and turned toward me. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "before we go in, I need to explain something." My stomach tightened. Dr. Chen suffered a massive heart attack at the train station tonight. If you hadn't been there to communicate with the paramedics, he would have died. The words struck me so hard I felt dizzy. "A heart attack?" I whispered. "But he seemed fine when I was talking to him." "He was already experiencing chest pain when you found him?" Agent Morrison said. That's why he was sitting alone. He was trying to manage it. When it worsened, he attempted to signal for help, but nobody understood what he needed. You saved his life by translating for the emergency responders. I stopped walking. I didn't translate for anyone, I said, confused and almost offended by the idea. I bought him a ticket. Agent Morrison blinked. Genuine confusion crossed his face. Mrs. Parker, the paramedics reported that a woman used sign language to communicate Dr. Chen's symptoms and medical history. That information was crucial for treatment. My memory shifted like a picture coming into focus. Samuel trying to ask that young couple something, and them moving away in disgust, the employee speaking louder instead of listening, the teenagers mocking his hands. I inhaled sharply, my mouth going dry. "Oh my God," I whispered. "He wasn't trying to travel. He was trying to get help." The Baltimore story was a cover, Agent Morrison confirmed gently. Dr. Chen is very private about his health. He didn't want to alarm you or make you feel obligated, but when the heart attack escalated, he tried to communicate with passers-by. You were the only person who understood. The corridor seemed to tilt around me. All evening, I thought I'd done a simple kindness for a stranded traveler. Instead, I'd saved a man's life, without even realizing that's what was happening. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked, my voice thin. "Thanks to you, yes," Agent Morrison said. The doctors treated him immediately because they understood what was happening. A few more minutes of delay and— He didn't finish the sentence. We stopped in front of a heavy wooden door with a small plaque that read, "Private Suite." Agent Morrison knocked softly, then opened it. Inside was a spacious room that looked nothing like any hospital room I'd ever seen. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, even a sitting area that felt like a hotel lounge. Samuel was propped up in bed, connected to monitors and tubes, but alert, steady, more alive than any man had the right to look after a heart attack, and then he looked directly at me. "Geraldine," he said out loud, clear, calm, and strong. "Thank you for coming," he said. I just stared at him. "You can speak." He smiled, and the expression completely softened his face. "I've been deaf since birth," he said, "but I learned to speak in my 20s. I don't use my voice much in public. People react strangely to a deaf accent. It's easier to let them assume I can't talk at all." The floor seemed to shift under me. Everything I thought I understood about our meeting at the station suddenly felt slightly off-kilter. "But the train ticket," he went on, his voice thick with emotion. "That was incredibly generous. You thought I needed help to travel, and you gave it anyway. You gave me $43 when you only had 50, he said. "I saw you counting your money, Geraldine. I know what that sacrifice meant." My face burned. "It wasn't that much. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Samuel said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I sat in that station for 2 hours watching people look right through me. You were the only one who saw past my disability and recognized I was a person in distress. And when you thought I was just stranded, you gave almost everything you had to help me." I moved closer to his bed, still trying to catch up with everything I was hearing. "The business card I gave you," he said. "That's my direct line. Geraldine, I need to ask you something important. Has anyone in your family ever mentioned my name, Dr. Samuel Chen, especially in relation to legal matters?" The question seemed to come from nowhere. "Legal matters?" I repeated. "No, I don't think so. Why would they?" Samuel glanced at Agent Morrison, and something wordless passed between them. "What do you know about your son's law practice?" he asked. A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Quincy specializes in estate planning. Elder law, mostly. He helps families with inheritance issues and—" I trailed off, an awful feeling rising in my chest. "Geraldine," Samuel said gently, "your son has been stealing from his elderly clients for over 3 years. Our hospital began investigating him after several families of our patients reported that inheritance funds had gone missing. The world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's impossible," I said. "Quincy would never do that. He's a respected attorney. He has ethics, professional standards. He's very careful." "He is careful," Agent Morrison said quietly. "He carefully chooses elderly clients with little family oversight, people who trust him completely and don't question how he manages their affairs." Samuel leaned forward slightly, his expression kind but unyielding. "I've been working with law enforcement for months, documenting everything. We have proof he's stolen from at least 12 clients, totaling more than $800,000. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "You're wrong. You have to be." "Geraldine," Samuel said softly, "when did you stop receiving your inheritance payments?" My blood ran cold. "What inheritance payments?" "From your husband's life insurance policy," he said. "Robert Parker had a substantial term life policy. It was structured to pay you monthly income for 20 years after his death. Those payments should have continued until 2015. My legs gave out, and I fell into the chair beside his bed. "I never got any inheritance payments," I said numbly. "Robert's policy barely covered the funeral costs." Samuel's expression darkened. "According to the insurance company's records, monthly payments of $1,400 have been sent to an account managed by Quincy Parker, acting as your financial guardian, since 2003. $1,400 every month for 20 years. The numbers swirled in my head, too big, too awful to grasp. $340,000. Money that should have kept me secure, money that should have meant I never had to choose between paying the gas bill and buying groceries, money that should have meant I never needed to chop onions for $10 just to get by. "That's not possible," I whispered. "I would have known. There would have been paperwork." "Your son filed guardianship papers shortly after your husband died," Agent Morrison explained. "He reported that you were struggling with grief-related depression and weren't capable of managing your own finances. The insurance company sent all correspondence directly to him." My mind flew back to those months after Robert's death. I'd been shattered, barely managing to function while trying to raise Quincy alone. He'd been 16, old enough to help with practical things, young enough to still need me. I'd been grateful when he took charge of the legal forms and calls. I'd been proud of how responsible and grown up he seemed. He had been stealing from me for 20 years. He started while he was still in high school and kept going through college, law school, his wedding, his entire adult life. Every time I struggled to pay rent, every time I apologized for not being able to help him financially, he'd been living off money that belonged to me. "The insurance company tried to contact you several times over the years when payments were delayed or questioned," Samuel continued. "Quincy intercepted everything. As far as they knew, you were being looked after." Images rushed through my head, Quincy bringing in my mail saying, "Let me help with the bills, Mom. It's too stressful for you." Me, so grateful, so proud of having such a dutiful son. "Does Emery know?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. Samuel nodded grimly. "She's actually the one who first suggested the guardianship fraud. We have emails between them discussing how to keep the arrangement hidden and avoid suspicion. Emery, who'd wrinkled her nose at me for smelling like onions. Emery, who'd treated me like an embarrassment at her perfect table. She'd been living in comfort paid for with the money stolen from me. The designer clothes, the marble countertops, the $68 organic turkey, all of it funded by my husband's life insurance." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why do you care about one old woman's family drama?" "Because you saved my life," Samuel said simply, "and because I've dedicated my career to protecting people who can't protect themselves. I run a foundation that provides legal support to elderly victims of financial abuse. When I started investigating your son, I never imagined I'd end up owing my life to one of his victims." The irony stole my breath. The son who stole my future had unknowingly led me to the man who could return it. The humiliation that drove me from Quincy's house had put me at the train station at the exact moment Samuel needed someone who understood him. "What happens now?" I whispered. "Now," Samuel said, "we get back what was stolen from you, and we make sure your son is held accountable for what he's done." Agent Morrison reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, heavy with papers. "We already have all the documentation prepared," he said. The insurance company has already frozen your son's access to the accounts, Agent Morrison said. You can have your money back by the end of the week. $340,000. The number was so huge it didn't feel real. It felt like a figure on a game board, not something that represented my actual life. But it did. It represented 20 years of struggle, 20 years of believing I was a burden, 20 years of accepting scraps and charity from the very people who were stealing from me. There's something else, Samuel said quietly. What happened tonight, my medical emergency, your intervention, it's given us the perfect opportunity to confront your son. We'd like you to be there when we do. I jerked my head up. What do you mean? We mean, Agent Morrison replied with a faint, knowing smile, that Quincy Parker is about to learn that the mother he dismissed tonight is the one person who now holds all the power in his life. As the implications settled over me, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't just relief. It wasn't just vindication. It was a deep, almost dizzying sense of justice. Tomorrow, the son who'd sent me away from his Thanksgiving table because I embarrassed him would discover that everything he owned, the house, the car, the life, had been built on money stolen from the woman he'd just rejected. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? 20 years of lies had been ripped away in a single conversation, and I lay in my narrow bed staring up at the stained ceiling of my efficiency apartment, feeling a strange, painful clarity. Samuel had sent me home with a thick folder of documents and Agent Morrison's card, promising they'd be in touch in the morning with a plan. But alone in the dark, listening to my neighbor's television bleed through the thin walls, my mind wandered beyond the legal and the financial. I thought of every time I'd apologized for not being able to contribute more to family gatherings. Every birthday when I'd given Quincy a modest gift and watched him receive it with that polite, distant gratitude reserved for elderly relatives who do their best. Every Christmas when Emery would make those subtle little comments about how hard it must be to live on a fixed income, how admirable it was that I made do. They had been stealing from me, while accepting my thanks for their occasional crumbs of generosity. The phone rang at exactly 8 a.m. "Mrs. Parker," came Agent Morrison's brisk, professional voice, "Dr. Chen would like to meet with you this morning before we speak to your son. Would 10 o'clock work?" By 9:30, I was already in my car in St. Mary's parking lot, the folder of evidence sitting heavy in my lap. The November sky was gray and low, matching the weight in my chest. Today my son would learn that his entire career, his marriage, his comfort, had all been built on theft and deceit. The real question was, what did I want to happen to him? Samuel looked noticeably better when I walked into his room. The monitors were gone. He wore regular clothes and sat in a chair by the window, a cup of coffee cradled in his hands. When he saw me, he stood and gave me a gentle hug. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Angry," I answered. "Confused, betrayed, but also weirdly relieved. At least now I know why my life never made sense." He nodded with quiet understanding. Financial abuse inside a family is uniquely damaging. It breaks trust in the people who are supposed to protect you. What you're feeling is completely normal. "What happens to Quincy?" I asked. "If we move forward, what does that actually mean for him?" Samuel's face grew serious. "That depends partly on what you want. We already have enough evidence for criminal charges: fraud, elder abuse, embezzlement. If convicted, he could be sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison and ordered to repay everything he's stolen, plus penalties." "And if I don't want to press criminal charges?" "In that case, we can still pursue civil remedies," he said. "The insurance company is highly motivated to cooperate. They were defrauded too. You'd recover your funds either way. But without criminal charges, Quincy might only face professional consequences. Loss of his law license, civil penalties, public disgrace, yes, but no prison." I turned toward the window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, my son was probably sipping his morning coffee, reviewing case files, completely unaware that the life he'd built was about to crack apart. "There's something else you need to know," Samuel said quietly. "We've been monitoring his communications since the investigation began. He paused, weighing his next words. Yesterday, after you left his house, Quincy called his law partner to talk about what he called the mother problem. My stomach twisted. What did he say? Samuel pulled a small recorder from his pocket. Are you sure you want to hear this? My hands shook, but I nodded. The recording clicked on. The audio was clear, no static, no distortion. Quincy's voice, calm and self-assured, sounded like it always had, but now it carried a different edge. She's getting more difficult, he said. Emery thinks we should start looking into assisted living options, something that would limit her access to family events. Another voice, David, his partner. That seems harsh. She's still mentally competent, isn't she? Physically, yes, Quincy replied, but she's becoming an embarrassment. Did you see how she showed up to Thanksgiving? She smelled like she'd been working in a restaurant kitchen. Emery was mortified in front of her parents. My throat closed up. He hadn't just been annoyed by me. He'd been ashamed of me. The financial guardianship makes it easier, Quincy continued. I can argue she's not capable of managing her living situation alone. The smell, the inappropriate behavior, the inability to maintain proper hygiene, it all helps build a case for incompetence. David sounded uneasy. Quincy, that sounds like you're manufacturing evidence. I'm documenting a natural decline, Quincy said smoothly. It happens to everyone. Better to deal with it proactively than wait for a crisis. And what about what she wants? David asked. Quincy laughed. It was a sound I recognized from 100 family dinners, 100 small jokes, only now I finally heard what was underneath it. David, she's living in a studio apartment and chopping onions for the neighbors to earn grocery money. Trust me, assisted living would be an upgrade. She'll thank us eventually. The recording clicked off. Samuel watched me carefully as he slipped the device back into his pocket. They weren't just stealing my money, I said slowly, my voice shaking. They were planning to steal my freedom. The financial abuse was phase 1, Samuel confirmed. Gaining full control over your living situation would have been phase 2. Once they placed you in a facility of their choosing, they could have controlled every aspect of your life while continuing to collect your benefits and manage your assets. The full weight of it, every lie, every manipulation, every false kindness, crashed down on me all at once. For years, I'd believed I was a burden, but the truth was so much worse. I had never been the burden. They had. This wasn't just about greed. They hadn't only been taking my money, they'd been chipping away at my independence, my dignity, my grip on reality. Every time I struggled and they stepped in with a token gesture, $20 here, a meal there, they were strengthening the illusion that I couldn't survive without their help, while quietly stealing hundreds of times that amount behind my back. How long have you been investigating Quincy? I asked. 8 months, Samuel replied. It started when Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell came to our patient advocacy office. Her grandson brought her in because she suspected her attorney was stealing from her trust fund. When we looked into it, we found a pattern. He opened another folder, this one filled with photographs, elderly men and women in their 70s and 80s, each posed in a dignified professional headshot, proud faces, trusting faces. 12 victims so far, he said. All clients of your son's firm. All elderly, all either widowed or mostly isolated. Your son was very careful about who he targeted. I studied the faces, and in their vulnerability, I saw my own. What happened to them? I asked quietly. Mrs. Hartwell lost $63,000 from her trust before her grandson intervened. Mr. Peterson lost his entire inheritance from his late wife, nearly $200,000. Mrs. Chen, Samuel's jaw tightened. Chen, are you related? I asked. He nodded. My aunt. She lost $120,000 before she died. That's when I got personally involved. That revelation twisted everything again. Samuel wasn't just some stranger I'd helped. He was a man whose own family had been robbed by my son, someone who had been working for months to expose Quincy's crimes. You knew who I was last night, I said slowly. At the train station. I suspected, he admitted. When you told me your last name was Parker, it felt like too much of a coincidence, but I didn't know for sure until Agent Morrison confirmed your identity. So, when you told me I would have a good life? I meant it, Samuel said. Your son's crimes were already on the verge of being uncovered, whether we met or not. But you saved my life, Geraldine. The least I could do was make sure that when justice came, it included you. A knock at the door interrupted us. Agent Morrison entered, followed by a woman in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Parker, he said, this is Attorney General Richards. She's here to discuss your options. Attorney General Richards looked to be in her 50s, with the steady, no-nonsense presence of someone who had spent years prosecuting hard cases. She shook my hand firmly and sat across from me. Mrs. Parker, she began, what happened to you is one of the most serious cases of familial financial abuse we've seen. Your son didn't just steal your money, he actively manipulated your understanding of your own finances to keep control over your life. What choices do I have? I asked. We can file criminal charges immediately, she said. The evidence is overwhelming. We can secure a conviction. Your son would likely face significant prison time and be ordered to pay full restitution. And if I don't want him to go to prison? I asked. Then we can focus on civil remedies and professional sanctions, she explained. We'll still recover your money. He would lose his law license and be barred from practicing, but he wouldn't serve jail time. I thought of the recording, of Quincy calmly discussing putting me in assisted living because I was an embarrassment, of Emery's sneer when she smelled onions on me, of 2 decades spent believing I was poor and useless while they lived off my stolen security. There's a third option, Attorney General Richards added. We can arrange a confrontation where your son learns about the investigation with you present. Sometimes, seeing the human impact, the person they hurt, forces defendants to fully grasp the severity of what they've done. You mean I could be there when you tell him you know everything? I asked. Yes. Dr. Chen believed it might bring you some closure to witness his reaction when he realizes the truth has caught up with him. I pictured Quincy asking me to leave his Thanksgiving table because I embarrassed him, Emery's disgusted expression, their secret plans to put me away somewhere and call it care. I want to be there, I said. I want to see his face when he realizes the mother he dismissed controls his entire future. Attorney General Richards gave a tight, satisfied smile. Then let's go see your son. As we left the room, Samuel gently took my arm. Geraldine, he said, whatever you decide about charges, remember this. Your power is back in your hands now. You're not the victim anymore. You're the one deciding what happens. For the first time in 20 years, that felt undeniably true. The drive to Quincy's office took about 25 minutes, plenty of time to rehearse in my mind what I wanted to say to the son who'd stolen my life while pretending to love me. By the time we pulled into the parking lot of his prestigious downtown firm, I knew exactly what kind of justice I wanted. The building matched everything I'd imagined: glass and steel, polished marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than I'd paid in rent over the last 2 years. A place built to impress and intimidate clients into believing their attorney was worth the massive fees. I'd only been there twice in the 20 years since Quincy opened his practice. Both times I'd felt like an imposter, a poor, awkward mother who didn't belong among his wealthy clientele. This time, walking through the lobby with Attorney General Richards and Agent Morrison beside me, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like someone with a mission. He's in a client meeting, the receptionist said, carefully polite but visibly nervous at the sight of law enforcement in suits. Mr. Parker asked not to be disturbed. Tell him it's about his mother, Richard said evenly. Tell him it's urgent. The young woman's eyes flicked over me, my modest coat, my practical shoes, clearly trying to make sense of why this elderly woman warranted such an escort. She picked up the phone and spoke in a low voice. He'll see you in 5 minutes, she said, hanging up. Conference room B. As we waited, I studied the framed photographs on the walls, Quincy shaking hands with judges, accepting Bar Association awards, posing at charity galas with Emery at his side. In every image he looked successful, polished, admirable, the kind of son people expected a mother to brag about. For years, I'd looked at those same images and felt nothing but pride. Now I saw something very different. I kept thinking about that recording Samuel had played, the way Quincy talked so casually about putting me in assisted living as if I were a logistical problem and not his mother, the way he laughed when his partner suggested I might have my own opinion about where I wanted to live. "Mrs. Parker," Attorney General Richards said softly, "are you ready for this?" My hands were trembling slightly, but my voice wasn't. "I've been ready for 20 years, I replied. "I just didn't know it." The conference room they led me into was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a long, polished table that could have seated 20 people. Quincy was already there when we walked in, standing at the head of the table in his perfectly tailored suit. I watched his expression shift, professional politeness, then confusion, then dawning alarm as he recognized who was with me. "Mom?" he said carefully. "What's going on? They said it was urgent." "Hello, Quincy," I answered, surprised at how steady I sounded. "We need to talk." Attorney General Richards immediately took control. She set her briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out several thick folders. "Mr. Parker, I'm Attorney General Richards. This is Agent Morrison with the Hospital Fraud Investigation Unit. We're here regarding your handling of your mother's finances." The color drained from Quincy's face, but he quickly shifted into lawyer mode. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," he said smoothly. "My mother manages her own finances." "Actually," Agent Morrison replied, glancing at his notes, "our records show that you've been managing them under a guardianship order since 2003, an arrangement that's allowed you to intercept and redirect monthly insurance payments totaling $340,000 over the last 20 years. For a second, Quincy's polished expression cracked. Then he pulled it back together. "I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding," he said. "My mother asked me to help with the paperwork after my father died. Everything I've done has been with her full knowledge and consent." "Is that true, Mrs. Parker?" Richards asked, turning to me. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd spent my life being proud of. "No," I said clearly. "It's not true. I never asked you to manage my finances. I never knew there were any insurance payments. I never knew anything about a guardianship." Quincy turned to me, his eyes flaring with a mix of anger and panic. "Mom, you were grieving. You couldn't handle the paperwork. I was trying to help." "By stealing from me?" I cut in. The word hung in the air like a bell that had finally been rung. Quincy flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I didn't steal anything," he snapped. His voice was rising now. "I invested your money. I've been managing it responsibly. You think that apartment you live in is cheap? You think your bills pay themselves? I've been supplementing your income for years." The audacity of it took my breath away. He was twisting it, trying to make his theft sound like charity, as if those occasional $20 bills, that random bag of groceries, somehow absolved him of draining my inheritance. "Supplementing my income with my own money," I said, "money that belonged to me from the beginning." Agent Morrison spread documents across the table. "Mr. Parker, we have bank statements showing monthly deposits of $1,400 from Hartwell Insurance into accounts controlled by you. We have letters confirming those payments were designated for your mother's support, and we have evidence that she never received any of those funds." Quincy stared at the paperwork, his jaw clenched, eyes flicking as he scanned for some legal escape route. "And then there are your other clients," Attorney General Richards continued. "Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, Mr. James Peterson, Mrs. Linda Chen, 12 elderly clients whose inheritances and trust funds you've systematically drained over the last 3 years." "What?" Quincy snapped. "That's completely different. Those are complex estate management cases. You can't just look at a ledger and assume—" "We can," Agent Morrison cut in. "When those ledgers show the same pattern of unauthorized withdrawals and fake expenses across multiple accounts. We've been building this case for 8 months, Mr. Parker. We're not guessing. We know." I watched my son as the reality finally began to sink in. The confident attorney facade slipped away, and for a brief moment I saw the frightened boy underneath. For a heartbeat, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered that recording. "Quincy," I said quietly. "After you told me to leave last night because I embarrassed you, what did you do?" He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Did you call your office?" I pressed. "Did you speak to David about me?" Confusion flickered into recognition, then fear. "How do you know about that?" Attorney General Richards took out the recorder. "Would you like to hear it?" she asked. "No," Quincy said sharply. "You can't use that. That's attorney-client privilege." "Your partner isn't your client, Mr. Parker," she said calmly. "And plotting to put your mother in a facility against her will isn't protected communication." She pressed play. The room filled with Quincy's voice, cool, dismissive, as he talked about the mother problem, about the smell, about building a case for incompetence, about how assisted living would be an upgrade. His little laugh when David asked about my wishes made my stomach twist. While the recording played, I watched his face change, from defiant to horrified to resigned. He understood. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about the way he'd stripped me of dignity without a second thought. When the recording ended, the silence was so heavy it felt physical. "Mom," Quincy said at last, sounding small, "I can explain." "Explain what?" I asked. "How you've been stealing from me since you were 16? How you plan to lock me in a facility because I no longer fit into the image you wanted to present? Explain how you laughed about the fact that my wishes didn't matter," I said. "I was trying to take care of you," Quincy snapped back. By taking away my freedom?" I cut in. "By making me believe I was a burden while you lived off money that belonged to me?" His composure finally shattered. "Do you have any idea how hard it's been?" he burst out. "Having a mother who works part-time at a library, who lives in a studio apartment, who shows up to family dinners smelling like someone else's kitchen. Do you know what that's like for someone in my position?" The brutal honesty hurt more than any lie could have. This had never been about my well-being. It was about his shame, his image, his ego. "You could have helped me," I said quietly, "with the money that was already mine. You could have made sure I lived comfortably instead of stealing from me and then feeling embarrassed by the poverty you created." "I didn't create anything," he shot back, anger overriding any instinct for self-preservation. "You chose to live like that. Even with the money I was managing, you could have asked for more. You could have lived better." "Asked who?" I demanded. "You never told me there was any money to ask for." Attorney General Richards rose to her feet. "Mr. Parker, you have two options," she said coolly. "You can cooperate with this investigation and negotiate a settlement that includes full restitution and professional sanctions, or we can move straight to criminal charges, elder abuse, fraud, embezzlement." Quincy's gaze darted from her to Agent Morrison, then finally to me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see him as the brilliant attorney or the ungrateful son. I saw him clearly, a weak man who had built everything he had on theft and lies. "What do you want from me?" he asked. I wasn't sure if he meant the state or me. "I want my money back," I said. "All of it. I want you to face consequences for what you've done, and I want you to understand that the mother you were ashamed of is the only reason you're not going to prison for a very long time." He frowned. "What does that mean?" Richards allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Your mother saved the life of Dr. Samuel Chen last night," she explained. "Dr. Chen runs the foundation that's been investigating your crimes. Because of her actions, he's recommended we offer you a plea deal rather than pursuing the maximum sentence." The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. The same night Quincy threw me out for embarrassing him, I had unknowingly saved the life of the one man who could end his career. The kindness he despised in me was the reason he was being shown mercy. "I don't understand," Quincy whispered. "You don't have to," I said, rising from my chair. "You just have to live with the consequences of your choices." I looked at him one last time, the son I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for. The man who had repaid me with theft, betrayal, and plans to lock me away. "Goodbye, Quincy," I said. "Do not contact me again." As I walked toward the door, I heard his voice crack as he called my name. I didn't turn back. Some relationships, once broken at that depth, can never be rebuilt. And for the first time in my life, I was at peace with that. 2 years later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, making coffee and watching the sun rise through windows that faced east instead of the brick wall I'd stared at for so many years. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, reliable central heating, and a view of the park where I took my morning walks. The settlement had been finalized just 6 weeks after that confrontation. $340,000 plus interest and penalties had been transferred into accounts in my name alone. Quincy had been disbarred and sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 5 years of probation and mandatory community service with elderly fraud victims. Emery filed for divorce before the judge even finished reading his sentence. Within a year, she'd married a plastic surgeon she'd met at a charity event and moved to Phoenix, taking whatever remained of my old life with her. I could have bought a house with that money. I could have traveled the world, leased a luxury car, or become one of those retirees who moved to Florida and spent their days on the beach. Instead, I chose something simpler, a comfortable life on my own terms. I invested wisely, kept enough to ensure I would never be desperate again, and designed my future around one core principle: I would never have to depend on anyone else. As I sat at the table reading the morning paper, a small luxury that still felt new after days when $50 had to stretch for a week, the phone rang. "Good morning, Geraldine." Samuel's voice was warm, familiar. "How are you feeling today?" "Free," I replied. The same answer I'd given him every time he'd asked that question for the past 2 years. After the investigation, Samuel and I had formed an unlikely friendship. He insisted that saving his life had created a bond between us that went beyond legal documents and case files. I suspected it was more than that. We were 2 people who knew what it meant to be betrayed by those we trusted, who understood the particular strength it takes to rebuild after someone has tried to erase your autonomy. "Are you ready for today?" he asked. Today was special. Quincy was being released, and as part of his probation, he had to attend a victim impact session. Anyone he'd stolen from could speak to him if they chose. I was the only one who agreed to appear. "I'm ready," I said. "Are you coming?" "I'll be there," he replied. "For moral support." The community center hosting the session looked like every other institutional public building. Neutral walls, functional furniture, architecture designed to calm people who had every reason not to be calm. I arrived early and sat in my car for a few minutes, thinking about what I wanted to say to the son I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. I'd received letters from him during his time inside, not many, but enough. I'd read the first one. Pages of self-pity, justifications, complaints about prison conditions, and endless protests that he'd only ever been trying to help me. I'd stopped reading halfway through and shredded the rest as they arrived. Still, news traveled. Through Samuel's connections in the legal world, I'd heard that Quincy had struggled in prison. Without his title, without his suits and status, he was just another inmate. Apparently, he'd ended up teaching GED classes and working in the prison library, discovering for the first time what it meant to do honest work for modest reward. Emery had remarried and moved on, trading our family name for a new one and a new life under the Arizona sun. When I walked into the community center lobby, Samuel was already waiting. Dressed in his usual understated style, he still carried himself with that quiet authority I'd come to recognize, born not of arrogance, but of purpose. Over the past 2 years, we'd learned a lot about each other. He was a widower with no children, pouring most of his energy into his foundation and his medical work. Somewhere along the way, he'd become the closest thing I had to family, and I suspected I'd become the same for him. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked as we walked toward the conference room where the session would take place. "Honestly," I said, "I want him to understand exactly what his choices cost me. But I also want him to know I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." The room was small and plain, with a circle of chairs around a low table. Quincy was already there, sitting beside his probation officer and a counselor from the Victim Services Program. He looked older and thinner, dressed in clothes that came from a thrift store instead of a designer rack. When he saw me, his face cycled through surprise, relief, guilt, and something that almost looked like hope. "Hi, Quincy," I said, taking the seat directly across from him. "Hi, Mom." His voice was hesitant. "Thank you for coming. I didn't know if you would." "I came because I have things to say," I replied. "Not because I want us to reconcile." The probation officer, Mrs. Patterson, which made me think fondly of the deaf neighbor who'd taught me sign language decades ago, went over the format. I would speak first while Quincy listened. After that, he could respond if I was willing to hear it. The goal was accountability and closure, not bargaining or forced forgiveness. I studied my son, the man who had once been the center of my world. I could still see the boy I'd raised underneath the prison pallor and cheap fabric, but there was a hardness there now too, something earned, not given. "I want you to understand what you took from me," I began. "Not just the money, though that was a lot. You stole 20 years of dignity. You made me believe I was a burden, that I was failing at life, that I should be grateful for crumbs of attention from my own family." Quincy's eyes filled with tears, but he stayed quiet. "You took my grip on reality," I continued. "I spent years wondering why I couldn't make ends meet, why everything felt so hard when other people my age seemed comfortable. I thought I was the problem, that I didn't understand how to manage money or live independently." I paused, steadying myself. The hardest part wasn't listing what he'd taken, it was admitting what I'd lost in myself. "You took my trust in family," I said. "For decades, I thought love meant accepting whatever treatment people chose to give me, being grateful for any scrap of attention, not asking questions when things didn't make sense. You taught me that family was something to endure, not something to cherish." I felt my hand tremble, and Samuel quietly reached over and squeezed it. "But I need you to hear this too, Quincy," I went on. "You didn't destroy me. You couldn't. Because the woman you were stealing from was stronger than either of us realized. The money you took, the dignity you tried to erase, the independence you wanted to control, every bit of that has been restored, not just because of the settlement, but because I finally understood I never needed your approval or help to have worth." Quincy was crying openly now, tears running down his face. "And that night," I said, "when you sent me away from your house because I embarrassed you, I went to a train station. I used my last $50 to help a stranger who needed someone to stand up for him. That small act of kindness led to everything that followed: the investigation, the recovery of my money, the exposure of what you'd done. The generosity you were ashamed of is the same kindness that saved you from a much harsher sentence." I stood, feeling the moment settle in my bones. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," I said. "I'm telling you so you understand that the mother you rejected was never the problem. Your shame about who I am, your need to control me, your willingness to steal from me instead of helping me, those were the problems." "Mom," Quincy said, his voice cracking, "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry. Prison gave me a lot of time to think about what I did, about how wrong I was. Is there any chance we could try again?" I looked at him for a long time, the boy I had loved, the man who had shaped my understanding of love, pain, and family. I felt sadness for what might have been, but beneath that, a deep and steady peace. "No, Quincy," I said, "there isn't." Even I was surprised by how final it sounded. I had expected to feel anger, maybe bitterness. Instead, I felt relief, like closing a door that had been banging in the wind for far too long. Shutting it wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. "I forgive you," I added, because holding on to anger would only hurt me. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to what we were. Some betrayals cut too deep to repair. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door, then I stopped and turned back. "I hope you rebuild your life honestly, Quincy," I said. "I hope you find peace. But you'll do it without me." Samuel was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against his car with the easy patience I'd come to rely on. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," I said, and for the first time, I meant it completely. We drove to the park near my apartment. the one where we often walked on weekend mornings. The November air was cool but not harsh, and the trees were holding on to their last flashes of color before winter. "What do you want to do with the rest of your day?" Samuel asked as we settled onto our usual bench overlooking the duck pond. "I was thinking about stopping by the library," I said. "I've been considering volunteering, maybe helping with their literacy program." He smiled. "That sounds exactly like you." We sat in easy silence, watching families feed the ducks and kids chase each other around the playground. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worrying about money, or wondering if I belonged somewhere, or twisting myself into knots trying to keep someone else happy. I was simply there, simply myself, simply free. "Samuel," I said after a while, "do you remember what you told me that night at the train station? You said I would have a good life." "I remember," he said. "How did you know?" He watched a young mother push her child on a swing before answering. "Because I saw how you treated a stranger when you thought no one was looking," he said. "People who are kind when they have very little, who give without expecting anything back. Those people deserve a good life. Sometimes it takes the universe a while to catch up, but justice usually finds a way." I thought about that as we walked back to my car. Justice, not revenge, not punishment, not even forgiveness, just the quiet balance of a life lived with integrity finally being met with peace. That evening, as I cooked dinner in my warm kitchen and mentally mapped out my week, volunteer shifts at the library, coffee with Samuel, book club with my neighbors, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I had finally become who I was meant to be, not Quincy's mother, not Emery's burden, not a victim defined by what had been taken from her, just Geraldine Parker, a woman who had survived betrayal and discovered her own strength was enough to build a life worth living. As I got ready for bed, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Probably a telemarketer, I thought, but I answered anyway. "Mrs. Parker? This is James Chen, Dr. Chen's nephew. My uncle asked me to call you. Mrs. Henderson, one of the other victims in your son's case, would like to meet you. She's starting a support group for people who've experienced financial abuse from family, and she thought you might be interested." I thought about it. A year earlier, I would have said no, too ashamed to speak openly about what had happened. Now, the idea of helping others through the same kind of betrayal felt like the natural next step in my own healing. "Tell her yes," I said. "I'd be honored to be involved." After I hung up, I took one last look around my apartment before turning out the lights. Tomorrow would bring new chances. To help, to be useful, to be kind, to be myself without apology. For the first time in my life, that felt not just enough, but more than enough. It felt like everything. And now I'm curious about you, the one who stayed with me through this story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever gone through something remotely similar? Let me know in the comments below. On the final screen, I'm leaving you with 2 more of this channel's favorite stories, both full of twists that might surprise you. Thank you for watching my story to the very end.